Get your broke ass out of first class." The words, sharp and venomous, sliced through the quiet hum of the cabin. Crystal, the flight attendant whose name tag gleamed with a practiced, artificial polish, snatched the boarding pass from Eleanor Vance's hand. She didn't just take it, she clawed it from her grasp, crumpling the stiff paper into a tight, contemptuous ball. With a flick of her wrist, she tossed it over her shoulder as if it were a piece of garbage. Eleanor, a woman of 72, whose life had been a masterclass in poise, recoiled instinctively. Her reading glasses, perched on the end of her nose, slipped and fell to the plush aircraft carpet. They landed with a soft, almost inaudible thud, but what happened next was anything but quiet. Crystal deliberately, with a theatrical slowness, brought the heel of her shoe down on the delicate frames. A sharp, sickening crack echoed in the stunned silence. The lenses shattered into a spider web of tiny fractures. "Whoops," Crystal sneered, her smile a slash of pure malice. Have you ever been so profoundly misjudged that the sheer weight of the truth would shatter the world of your accuser? If you have, then you know the crushing pressure, the icy calm that descends in the heart of the storm. Hit that subscribe button and tell us in the comments if you've ever had to hold a hurricane of truth inside you while someone tried to tear you down. We want to hear your stories on Blacktail Stories, because sometimes the quietest people have the most deafening truths to tell. Eleanor Vance remained seated in 1A. Her hands, wrinkled with age but steady as stone, found the armrests, her fingers gripping the cool leather. She looked down at the glittering fragments of her glasses, a small, meaningless act of destruction in the grand scheme of her life, and then looked back up at Crystal. There was no anger in her eyes, only a deep, resonant dignity that seemed to pull the very air out of the cabin. Around them, the other first-class passengers watched, their faces a mixture of shock, discomfort, and a shameful, unspoken curiosity. A phone emerged from a pocket, its small black lens a silent, greedy eye, and began to record. Eleanor said nothing. Her composure was a fortress built over 7 decades of slights and assumptions. This was not a new battle, merely a new battlefield. This was Friday, 4:15 p.m. Majestic Air, Flight 788, non-stop from Atlanta to London Heathrow. She reached for her purse, her movements unhurried, graceful, despite the chaos simmering around her. Inside, nestled between her leather-bound wallet and a velvet case for her now-destroyed glasses, lay a second, pristine boarding pass. Her assistant always printed a backup. She unfolded it with the care of someone handling a sacred text. Seat 1A, first class, purchased and confirmed. "Miss," Eleanor's voice was not loud, but it cut through the cabin's charged atmosphere like silk sliding over steel. "Perhaps you'd like to examine this." Crystal glanced at the new boarding pass and let out a harsh, grating laugh that made a man in 2C visibly cringe. "Lady, I don't give a damn what fake ticket you printed on your little computer at home. This," she gestured around the spacious cabin with a proprietary air, "is first class, and you can't afford to be here." Her voice rose with each word, a deliberate performance for the captive audience. A businessman in 2C, draped in a cashmere sweater, whispered to his wife, "Probably stole someone's confirmation number. You see it all the time." The woman nodded, her expression one of smug knowingness. "They always try to pull something." Eleanor's phone buzzed on the small table beside her. A text message glowed on the lock screen. "London board meeting moved to 9 a.m. tomorrow. Sir David wants to see the final proposal beforehand. Marcus." She typed back a quick reply, her thumb moving with practiced efficiency. "Flight delayed by a minor disturbance. Handle the 5 p.m. pre-call without me. I'll brief Sir David in the morning." At 4:17 p.m., Crystal's voice, now laced with theatrical urgency, crackled over the intercom. Gary, I need you up here. We have a situation in first class. Gary, the cabin supervisor and a 20-year veteran of the airline, appeared within moments. His eyes, trained to assess and de-escalate, swept the scene in a single practiced glance. He saw the elegantly dressed, elderly black woman. He saw the shattered glasses glittering on the floor. He saw the crumpled ball of paper that was once a boarding pass. And he saw Crystal, arms crossed, face set in a mask of righteous indignation. He'd seen this dance 1,000 times before, and 1,000 times before the dance ended the same way. "Ma'am, I'm Gary, the cabin supervisor," he said, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone. "Is there a problem with your seating arrangement?" Eleanor, her composure still an unbreachable wall, handed him the intact boarding pass. "There is no problem on my end, Mr. Gary. I am seated precisely where my ticket indicates I should be." Gary examined the document. Seat 1A, a valid confirmation code, the current date. Everything appeared to be legitimate. His mind raced through the corporate playbook. "Sometimes the system double books," he said carefully, the words a well-worn lie. "It's a rare glitch, but it happens. What we can do is offer you a seat in our premium economy section for this flight, and we'll upgrade you to first class on your next flight with us, completely complimentary." "Mr. Gary," Eleanor replied, her voice losing none of its silken steel, "I am already in first class. This is my assigned seat." Behind them, the passenger with the phone began live streaming. The camera's unblinking eye captured Eleanor's composed face, the scattered glass at her feet, and Crystal's smug, crossed-armed stance. "Y'all seeing this?" the streamer whispered into his phone's microphone. "The discrimination happening right now on Majestic Air? This queen has a first-class ticket, and they are literally trying to throw her out of her seat." The viewer count began to climb. 50, 200, 1,000. It was now 4:20 p.m. Eleanor opened her wallet to retrieve her identification. As she did, something else inside caught the cabin light. It was a card, matte black and impossibly heavy-looking, an American Express Centurion card. The legendary black card, an object of myth whispered about in financial circles, reserved for those whose annual spending soared into the high six figures. Gary noticed. For the first time, his confident, practiced demeanor flickered. A tiny crack appeared in his professional armor. "Ma'am, if I could just verify your identification." Eleanor handed him her driver's license. Eleanor Vance. An address in a quiet, brutally expensive enclave of Atlanta. The details matched her boarding pass perfectly. But Crystal, emboldened by her supervisor's presence, wasn't backing down. "Gary, just look at her," she stage whispered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. "Does she look like she belongs in first class? These people are always causing trouble. She probably used miles she didn't even earn." The live stream viewer count ticked past 3,000. The comments began to pour in, a torrent of digital outrage. "This is disgusting. Sue them into the ground. Majestic Air showing their true colors." At 4:22 p.m., Eleanor's phone rang. The contact name flashed on the screen for a brief second. David Vance. Her son. She declined the call and sent a quick text. "In a situation. We'll call you later, don't worry." Gary was studying her boarding pass again, turning it over and over, searching for a flaw, a smudge, any excuse to justify his escalating problem. But the paper was legitimate. The confirmation code was valid. The seat was hers. But the unwritten rules of company culture, the ingrained biases and subtle prejudices, ran deeper than any printed policy. "Ma'am," he said, his voice taking on a graver tone. "I'm going to have to call the captain up here. This might take a few more minutes." "Take all the time you need," Eleanor replied, her voice as level and professional as a CEO addressing her board. I'm not going anywhere." More phones were out now. The spectacle in first class had become the in-flight entertainment. The live stream's audience swelled. 5,000, 8,000, 12,000. An elderly white woman in 3B, her face etched with disapproval, finally spoke up. "Excuse me, but this is utterly ridiculous. The woman has a valid ticket. Can't you see that?" "Mind your business, Gladys," Crystal snapped, her professional mask slipping to reveal the raw ugliness beneath. "We handle disruptions our way." At 4:25 p.m., the gate agent's voice echoed through the cabin. "Final boarding call for Majestic Air Flight 788 to London. All passengers should be on board." The pressure was mounting. Every minute of delay cost the airline thousands of dollars. Passengers in the back of the plane were growing restless, their murmurs a rising tide of discontent. Eleanor glanced at her watch, a simple, elegant Cartier, a gift from her late husband. Platinum and understated, like everything else about her. "I have a rather important meeting in London," she said quietly, her words directed at Gary but intended for everyone. "I would prefer to handle this expeditiously." Gary made his decision. He reached for the cabin intercom. "Captain Miller, could you please come to the first-class cabin? We need management approval for a passenger removal." Eleanor's eyebrows arched a fraction of an inch. "Removal, Mr. Gary? On what grounds? I have not violated any regulations. I am seated in my assigned seat with all the appropriate and valid documentation." "Company policy, ma'am," Gary recited, his eyes avoiding hers. "When there's a seating dispute that can't be resolved, the captain makes the final call." The live stream hit 15,000 viewers. The hashtag "Dorsa Majestic Air Fail" started trending in Atlanta. Eleanor reached into her purse again. This time her fingers closed around a slim, embossed business card. She pulled it out but kept it concealed in her palm. She held it like a chess master contemplating a devastating final move, a move she hoped she would not have to make. "Very well," she said, her voice a soft, dangerous whisper. "Let's see what the captain decides." Her phone buzzed again. David Vance calling. "David," she let it go to voicemail. At 4:27 p.m., Captain Mike Miller emerged from the cockpit. The 4 gold stripes on his epaulets seemed to catch and magnify the overhead lights. 25 years with Majestic Air had carved lines of authority and impatience into his face. He had learned to handle difficult passengers with swift, decisive, and unquestionable authority. He took one look at Eleanor Vance, at her dark skin, her simple but elegant clothes, her age, and his expression hardened. He saw not a passenger, but a problem. Another entitled customer trying to game the system. "What's the situation, Gary?" His voice boomed, a voice accustomed to being obeyed. "Passenger refuses to move to her correct seat, Captain," Gary reported, his voice now deferential. "Claims she belongs in first class." He handed over Eleanor's boarding pass and ID, speaking louder than necessary. "She's been causing a disruption for nearly 15 minutes now." Miller barely glanced at the documents. The passenger looked respectable enough, he supposed, but he'd seen it all before. Stolen confirmation codes, photoshopped boarding passes, elaborate sob stories about misunderstandings. "Ma'am," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "We have a schedule to maintain. I need you to gather your belongings and move to the economy cabin immediately. We'll sort this out on the ground." Eleanor remained seated, her hands folded calmly in her lap, a portrait of serene defiance. "Captain Miller, my ticket is valid. My seat assignment is correct. I will not be moving." The cabin fell so silent you could hear the faint hum of the avionics. The live stream's audience had swelled to 25,000 viewers. The comments were a waterfall of fury. "Security to gate C-34, Miller spoke into his radio, his voice cold and clipped. "We need passenger assistance on Flight 788, possible ticket fraud situation." Crystal Martinez smiled, a small, triumphant curl of her lips. Finally, someone with the authority to handle this woman properly. At 4:30 p.m., 2 airport security officers boarded the aircraft. Officer Rodriguez, a stocky man with kind eyes and 2 decades of experience, sized up the situation instantly. He saw the entitled flight crew, the agitated captain, and the unnaturally calm woman at the center of it all. Officer Kim, younger, newer to the job, looked deeply uncomfortable with the public spectacle. "Ma'am, you need to cooperate with the flight crew," Rodriguez said, his tone gentle but firm, his hand resting casually on his radio. "We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way." Eleanor looked up at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Officer Rodriguez, I assume you'd like to see my documentation before making any irreversible decisions." She handed him her boarding pass and her ID. Rodriguez examined them carefully, pulling out his phone to check the confirmation code against the airline's live manifest. A few taps, a moment of silence, and his eyebrows shot up. Everything was legitimate. Seat 1A. Purchased 6 days ago. Paid in full. "Captain," he said, turning to Miller. "Her paperwork checks out completely. Seat 1A, first class. It's a valid purchase." "I don't care what the paper says," Miller snapped, his face flushing with anger. "Look at this disruption. She's been arguing with my crew, delaying my flight. Remove her." The businessman in 2C whispered loudly to his wife. "See? Probably bought the ticket with a stolen credit card. They always do." His wife nodded sagely. "Should have just taken the economy seat instead of trying to sneak into first class." Eleanor heard every poisonous word. She said nothing. Her silence was more powerful than any shout. On the live stream, the comments exploded. "This is a federal crime. Call the news. Where is the ACLU? Majestic Air is finished. Someone find out who this magnificent woman is." What would you do at this point? When the evidence is on your side, but every person in authority has already judged and convicted you based on nothing more than their own prejudice. Let us know in the comments below. Your story matters. Your voice deserves to be heard. And if you're finding value in this story, make sure you hit that like button. It helps our stories reach more people who need to hear them. At 4:33 p.m., the gate supervisor, Patricia Carter, rushed onto the plane, a tablet clutched in her hand, beads of sweat on her forehead. She'd been monitoring the escalating social media storm from the gate, watching in horror as a routine boarding turned into a full-blown PR catastrophe. "What exactly is happening here?" she demanded, slightly out of breath. Crystal stepped forward eagerly, her voice a practiced symphony of professional concern. "Passenger boarded with questionable documentation, ma'am. She's refused to comply with crew instructions, and she's been disruptive and argumentative from the moment she sat down." Eleanor finally spoke again, her voice a quiet counterpoint to Crystal's shrill accusations. "Miss Carter, I would like to request a private conversation with Captain Miller. I believe this entire situation can be resolved quickly and quietly with proper management." "No private conversations," Miller barked. "You move now, or security removes you. Those are your only options." Patricia checked her tablet, her face paling. The hashtag #CharterMajesticAirFail was now trending nationwide. The live stream had just passed 35,000 viewers. Her corporate crisis training kicked into high gear. Contain, minimize, deflect. "Ma'am," Patricia said carefully, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "We can offer you a full refund for this flight, plus a $500 voucher for future travel. We can book you into a first-class suite on tomorrow's first flight out. Would that be acceptable?" "I am not interested in future flights," Eleanor said, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. "I have business in London tonight that cannot be rescheduled." "What kind of business?" Crystal interrupted with a derisive sneer. "A job interview? A welfare appointment?" Officer Kim shot Crystal a sharp, warning look. Even he recognized that the comment was a blatant, ugly crossing of a line. At 4:35 p.m., Eleanor's phone rang again. David Vance, for the third time in 5 minutes. She declined the call and texted, still handling the situation. "Don't worry about me." Her son's reply was instantaneous. "Mom, call me now. This is urgent. I'm seeing reports online." Eleanor stared at the message, and for the first time, her iron composure showed a hairline crack. David had seen the live stream. Her fiercely protective son, the boy she had raised to be a titan, was probably mobilizing half of Atlanta at that very moment. She looked around the cabin. She was surrounded. 2 security officers flanked her like she was a common criminal. The flight crew blocked the aisle, a human wall of prejudice. 40 passengers recorded her humiliation for their social media feeds. The captain glared down at her, his face a mask of unconcealed irritation and racial bias. She made a decision. "Captain Miller," she said, her voice regaining its strength, "I would like to make one phone call before we proceed." "Absolutely not," he spat. "We are already 20 minutes behind schedule because of your theatrics." "One call," Eleanor repeated, her voice firm, the request now a demand. "Then you can do whatever you feel is necessary." Officer Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Something about this woman's calm, unwavering confidence deeply unsettled him. This wasn't the behavior of a guilty person. "Captain," he murmured, "maybe we should just let her make the call." "No calls," Miller's voice echoed through the first-class cabin. "Security, escort this passenger off my aircraft immediately." The passengers in economy, drawn by the commotion, craned their necks to see, their own phones now held high for a better camera angle. At 4:38 p.m., the situation reached its zenith. Eleanor found herself completely boxed in. 2 security officers on either side of her seat. Captain Miller blocking the aisle in front of her, arms crossed like a petulant king. Crystal and Gary stood behind him, cutting off any possibility of retreat. Patricia Carter was filming with her tablet, her face a mask of corporate panic as she documented the incident. 40 phones capturing every angle, and 50,000 people watching the live stream worldwide. The oxygen in the cabin felt thin. All conversation had ceased. Even the aircraft's ventilation system seemed to quiet, as if the plane itself were holding its breath. Eleanor Vance sat perfectly still in seat 1A, her hands folded in her lap. The business card remained hidden in her purse, a secret weapon held in reserve, a secret that could shatter careers and end this nightmare in an instant. But she waited. Sometimes the most powerful move is not a move at all, but a moment of profound, strategic patience. "Ma'am, you need to stand up. Right now," Rodriguez ordered, his voice laced with genuine reluctance. "We're ending this." Eleanor looked directly into the lens of the live streaming phone. Her voice, calm and clear, carried across the silent cabin, each word chosen with the surgical precision of a master orator. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "what you are witnessing is precisely why systemic change is so desperately necessary in corporate America. This is how paying customers are treated when baseless assumptions are allowed to override documented evidence." Miller exploded. "That's it. I have had enough of your speeches. Remove her now." Rodriguez hesitated. Something in her tone, measured, executive, almost regal, gave him serious pause. This was not how disruptive passengers behaved. "Ma'am, I really don't want to have to physically remove you from this aircraft." Eleanor allowed herself a small, faint smile, and for just a moment, her mask of a vulnerable elderly passenger slipped. Something steely, ancient, and immensely powerful flashed in her eyes. "Officer Rodriguez, I appreciate your professionalism more than you will ever know, but I think we are past the point where physical removal will be necessary." With deliberate, almost theatrical slowness, she reached for her phone. At 4:40 p.m., just as she unlocked the screen, Miller lunged forward, his hand outstretched to snatch the device from her. "I said no calls," he roared. But Eleanor's reflexes, honed by a lifetime of navigating treacherous boardrooms and hostile negotiations, were quicker than anyone expected. She pulled the phone back, her fingers already dialing a number not from her contacts, but from memory. The phone rang once, twice. "Please answer," she whispered to herself. Miller reached for the phone again, but this time Officer Rodriguez caught his arm in a firm grip. "Captain, let her make the damn call. This whole thing is being live-streamed to 50,000 people. You do not want footage of yourself grabbing a phone from an elderly woman." The third ring echoed through the silent cabin. Then, a click. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was male, crisp, and radiated an effortless authority that was only slightly distorted by the phone's speaker. Eleanor's voice remained steady. "David, it's your mother. I'm on Majestic Air Flight 788, and we seem to be having a situation that requires your immediate attention." There was a long, pregnant pause. "Mom? Where exactly are you right now? Are you safe?" Captain Miller felt an icy dread crawl up his spine. The name David Vance sounded familiar. Terribly, horribly familiar. "I'm sitting in seat 1A, first class," Eleanor replied calmly. "There appears to be some confusion regarding my seating assignment." Another pause, much longer this time. When the man spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone, replaced by something arctic and lethally calm. "Mom, put whoever is in charge on the phone. Right now." Miller's face had gone ashen. In the live stream chat, the messages were flying too fast to read. "David Vance? Wait, is that... Oh my God. No freaking way. Is this really happening?" Eleanor looked up at Captain Miller with an expression that might have been mistaken for pity. "Captain Miller," she said, holding out her phone. "The gentleman on the line would like to speak with you. Personally." Miller stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake poised to strike. Who is this?" Eleanor Vance's smile was small, but it was absolutely devastating. "Captain Miller, I'd like you to meet my son." At 4:42 p.m., Miller reached for the phone with a hand that trembled visibly. The entire cabin, the entire world watching online, held its breath. "This is Captain Mike Miller, Majestic Air Flight 788, he croaked. The voice on the other end was as cold and sharp as chipped ice. "Captain Miller, this is David Vance. Do you know who I am?" Miller's throat went dry. David Vance. The name hit him like a physical blow, a freight train of realization. Every single employee of Majestic Air, from the baggage handlers to the board of directors, knew that name. Mr. Vance, sir." "I'll take that as a yes," the voice on the phone replied. "Now, Captain Miller, I want you to explain to me, very carefully, why my mother is calling me from your aircraft because your crew is trying to remove her from a seat she paid for." The phone nearly slipped from Miller's sweaty palm. Around him, the cabin had become a tomb. Even the live stream chat had gone eerily, expectantly quiet. "Sir, there was, a misunderstanding about the seating assignments." "A misunderstanding?" David Vance's voice could have frozen oxygen. "Captain, put me on speaker. I want everyone in that cabin to hear this." Miller looked around desperately. Patricia Carter, her face the color of chalk, nodded frantically, understanding the sheer magnitude of their blunder. With a shaking finger, he pressed the speaker button. At 4:43 p.m., David Vance's voice, amplified and crystal clear, filled every corner of Majestic Air Flight 788. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Vance. I am the chairman and CEO of the Vance Global Holdings Group, the parent company that owns Majestic Air. I want to personally and sincerely apologize that you are all being forced to witness what appears to be a complete and systematic failure of our customer service standards." The cabin erupted. Not in noise, but in a collective, sharp intake of breath. Phones were dropped. Passengers frantically Googled David Vance and Vance Global Holdings. The livestream viewer count exploded past 75,000. Eleanor sat quietly in seat 1A, a queen on her throne, watching the world pivot on its axis around her. "Mom," David continued, his voice softening with concern when he addressed her. "Are you okay? Have you been hurt or threatened in any way?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she replied. "Just disappointed." That single word, disappointed, carried more weight, more crushing power than any threat or lawsuit ever could. Crystal Martinez had gone completely white, looking as though she might faint. Gary, the supervisor, looked like he was having a genuine heart attack, his hand clutching his chest. Patricia Carter was furiously typing on her tablet, probably updating her resume and her LinkedIn profile simultaneously. Officer Rodriguez stared at Eleanor with a look of dawning, profound respect. Officer Kim had quietly stepped back, wanting to be as far away from the blast radius as possible. At 4:44 p.m., David's voice returned, once again the Arctic instrument of corporate power. "Captain Miller, I want you to walk me through exactly what has transpired on my aircraft." Miller stammered through a pathetic, disjointed explanation. "Sir, there was confusion about the boarding pass. The crew followed standard procedure for seating disputes." "Standard procedure?" David's tone could have stripped paint from the fuselage. "Captain, what does Federal Aviation Regulation 382.7 state regarding passenger discrimination?" Silence. "I'll help you out, Captain. It states that air carriers shall not discriminate against any passenger on the basis of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, or ancestry. Are you familiar with this particular federal regulation?" "Yes, sir, but..." "And are you also familiar with the Majestic Air Company Policy Manual, Section 4, Subsection 12, which I personally helped draft, the one titled Zero Tolerance for Bias-Based Incidents?" Miller was drowning, and the water was rising fast. "Sir, we were just..." Section 4.12 states that a validly ticketed passenger cannot be removed from an aircraft without a documented safety violation or an act of criminal activity. "Captain Miller, has my mother committed any crimes this afternoon?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone on the plane, everyone watching online, knew the answer. "No, sir." "Has she violated any safety regulations?" "No, sir." "Has she been anything other than cooperative and dignified in the face of your crew's harassment?" Miller glanced at Eleanor, who maintained her serene, unshakable composure. She refused to move from her seat, to move from her assigned, fully paid-for first-class seat to the economy cabin, David clarified, his voice dangerously soft. The seat she purchased 6 days ago with her personal American Express Centurion card. The business travelers in rows 2 and 3 shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They recognized that card. They understood its implications. Only the ultra-wealthy, the 1% of the 1%, qualified for Centurion status. Crystal Martinez, her career and future disintegrating in real time, finally found her voice. "Mr. Vance, sir, we didn't know. I mean, she didn't say anything." David's response was swift and brutal, a verbal execution broadcast for the world to hear. "Miss Martinez, are you suggesting that my mother should have been required to announce her relationship to me in order to be treated with basic human dignity?" Silence. "Are you suggesting," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, that was somehow more menacing than a shout. That other passengers who are not related to the chairman of the board, deserve to be treated differently? Crystal said nothing. There was nothing to say. At 4:47 p.m., David Vance laid out his philosophy and the airline's new mandate for all to hear. Let me be crystal clear. I run this holding company, and by extension, this airline, with one unbreakable expectation: that every single passenger, regardless of their connections, their appearance, their race, or their background, receives the exact same standard of exemplary service. What happened here today is a cancer, and we are going to cut it out. The live stream had now surpassed 100,000 viewers. The hashtag #CEOMom was trending worldwide. News outlets were already scrambling reporters, picking up the story. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice cutting through the tension. David, I want you to know that Officer Rodriguez has been professional and courteous throughout this entire ordeal. He has simply been following the orders of his superiors. Rodriguez looked at Eleanor with a profound sense of gratitude and respect. Thank you, Mom, David said, his tone shifting. Officer Rodriguez, your professionalism in this unacceptable situation has been noted. Then, his voice softened as he addressed his mother again. Mom, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to answer me honestly. Given what you have just experienced, do you feel comfortable and safe flying to London with this crew? Eleanor looked around the cabin. She saw Crystal, who refused to make eye contact, staring at the floor. She saw Gary, sweating profusely, looking at her with pleading eyes. She saw Captain Miller holding the phone like it might bite him, his career in her hands. David, she said, with the wisdom of a woman who understood that true power lay not in revenge, but in reform. I think there are some very valuable learning opportunities here. Even in her moment of absolute vindication, Eleanor Vance was thinking not of retribution, but of education. At 4:50 p.m., David Vance's voice returned to the clipped, decisive tone of a CEO. Captain Miller, you have two choices. Option 1, we handle this as an internal training opportunity with appropriate and severe consequences, leading to systemic, company-wide changes. Option 2, this becomes a federal discrimination lawsuit, a media circus that will haunt this airline for years, and a congressional hearing on airline industry bias. The choice is yours. Miller found his voice, weak and trembling. Mr. Vance, we want to handle this internally. We'll make this right, sir. I swear it. Good choice, David said. Here is what is going to happen, effective immediately. Miss Martinez, you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. Mr. Gary, you are suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. Captain Miller, you will report to my headquarters on Monday morning for remedial training and a full performance review. Miss Carter, you will coordinate with our legal and HR departments to begin drafting a new, company-wide bias prevention protocol. The live stream chat went wild. Eleanor reached into her purse and finally withdrew the business card she had been holding. It wasn't a credit card, it was her own. The elegant script read, Eleanor Vance, Chairwoman, the Vance Foundation for Education and Social Equity. She had never needed to use it. Her dignity had been enough. David, she said softly, I think we've made our point. Can we please go to London now? I have a board meeting to attend in the morning. There was a pause. And then, for the first time in the entire agonizing ordeal, David Vance laughed. It was a sound of warmth, of relief, of profound love and admiration. Yes, ma'am. Flight 788. You are cleared for immediate departure. Mom, I will see you at the meeting tomorrow. We have some new policies to discuss. As the call ended, David Vance's voice returned one last time, a boardroom decree delivered at 30,000 feet. Before we proceed, I want everyone on this aircraft to understand the magnitude of what just occurred." The live stream, now at 125,000 viewers, became the official record. Major news networks were running breaking news alerts. Billionaire CEO's mother discriminated against on his own airline. Vance Global Holdings generated over $70 billion in revenue last year. David's voice boomed from the phone, a lecture in real-world consequences. Majestic Air's market capitalization currently stands at $18 billion. We employ over 150,000 people worldwide. What happened to my mother in the last 30 minutes could cost this company between $100 and $200 million in legal settlements, stock price impact, and irreparable damage to our reputation. Eleanor watched Captain Miller's face as he processed those numbers. His pension, his career, his family's future, all hanging by the thread of her grace. "But more importantly," David continued, his voice resonating with a deeper, more personal fury, "this incident represents a systemic failure that affects thousands of our passengers every day. People who do not have my phone number. People who cannot call the chairman when they are treated like criminals for simply existing while black." Patricia Carter was taking frantic notes, her mind already spinning damage control scenarios, trying to salvage the smoldering wreckage of their brand. At 4:55 p.m., the lesson began. "Captain Miller, I want you to walk me through your decision-making process," David commanded. "And I want you to remember that 125,000 people are listening, and this entire conversation is being recorded for legal and training purposes." Miller cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Vance, when we have seating disputes, our standard protocol is to defer to the judgment of the cabin crew on the scene." "Stop," David's voice cut like a surgeon's scalpel. "Let's be precise. You examined my mother's valid boarding pass, her valid photo identification, and you were made aware of her valid, top-tier payment method. At what precise moment did the judgment of your crew override documented, verifiable evidence?" A thick, suffocating silence stretched across the cabin. "I'm waiting, Captain." Miller looked around desperately for support. Crystal had physically turned her back to him, facing the galley wall. Gary was studying his own shoes as if they held the secrets to the universe. "Sir," Miller stammered, there was an assumption made." "An assumption based on what, Captain Miller?" David asked. The question everyone knew was coming. The question that would define careers, launch lawsuits, and echo in congressional hearings for months to come. Miller couldn't answer. He couldn't say the truth. The truth, that he had looked at Eleanor Vance, at her skin color and her age, and seen someone who he believed did not belong in first class, would be the immediate end of his career. At 4:58 p.m., David answered for him. "Let me help you out, Captain," he said, with devastating, chilling calm. "Internal data, which I review weekly, shows that Majestic Air receives 347% more discrimination complaints per passenger mile than our closest competitor. Our customer satisfaction rating among minority passengers has dropped 23% in the last 18 months alone." Eleanor reached into her briefcase and withdrew a sealed manila envelope marked Confidential, Board Resolution 2024-127. She held it up, angled so that Patricia Carter could see the header clearly. Patricia's eyes widened in recognition and horror. Whatever was in that envelope was corporate dynamite. "These statistics are not accidents, Captain Miller," David continued, his voice a hammer striking nail after nail. "They represent a systemic bias that has been allowed to fester in our training, our policies, and our corporate culture. What happened to my mother today is not an isolated incident. It is a symptom of a disease that runs through the heart of this entire organization." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Under Federal Aviation Regulation 382.7, what you and your crew did today constitutes a federal crime. punishable by up to 5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines per incident. Under the Civil Rights Act, my mother could sue this company for unlimited punitive damages, and under our own corporate charter, which you agreed to uphold, discrimination incidents of this nature trigger immediate termination for cause, without severance. The legal framework was a cage, and the doors had just slammed shut. Every person on that aircraft understood they were witnessing the public execution of multiple careers. But here is what's going to happen instead, David continued, his voice shifting slightly. Because my mother, despite everything you have just put her through, still believes in education over elimination. Eleanor spoke for the first time in several minutes, her voice clear and strong. David, tell them about the envelope. She held up the sealed document for all to see. Board Resolution 2024-127, approved by the board last month, allocates $25 million for the creation and implementation of a new mandatory bias prevention and de-escalation training program utilizing next-generation AI monitoring. I was flying to London to present the final implementation plan to our international board tomorrow. Patricia Carter nearly dropped her tablet. A $25 million initiative. This was not some minor HR project. This was a massive executive-level transformation that had been in the works for months. Today's unfortunate incident, Eleanor continued calmly, has just become our pilot program. At 5:02 p.m., David took control again. So here is your choice, Captain Miller. You can continue to pretend this was all a simple misunderstanding, in which case our legal department will file federal discrimination charges first thing Monday morning. Or you can acknowledge what really happened here today, and you can become part of the solution. Miller looked around the cabin. The live stream was still running. His crew was avoiding his gaze. His career, his entire life, was balanced on a knife's edge. He looked at Eleanor Vance, dignified, composed, impossibly, devastatingly gracious, and he finally truly understood the colossal magnitude of his failure. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice cracking with the weight of his admission, I made serious, unforgivable errors in judgment today." "What kind of errors, Captain?" David pressed. This was the moment of truth. Miller took a deep breath and looked directly at Eleanor. "Sir," he said, his voice now clear and steady with the awful certainty of confession. "We discriminated against your mother. We did it based on racial assumptions. We violated federal regulations. We violated company policy, and we violated basic human decency." The live stream chat exploded with messages of approval and shock. Sometimes, accountability was more powerful than revenge. "Miss Martinez," David's voice found the flight attendant, who was still cowering in the galley. "Do you have anything to add?" Crystal Martinez had been with Majestic Air for 3 years. 3 years of treating passengers differently based on their appearance, their accents, their clothes, their perceived social status. She had never been called on it, not once, until now. She turned around, tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Vance," she sobbed, I'm so sorry, I was wrong." "Wrong about what, specifically?" David demanded. "I judged your mother before I knew anything about her," she confessed. "I treated her like she didn't belong because—" Her voice cracked. "Because she was black." The admission hung in the air. Raw, honest, devastating. Eleanor spoke, her voice impossibly gentle. "Thank you for your honesty, Miss Martinez. That took courage." Even now, in her moment of total vindication, Eleanor Vance was still teaching. At 5:05 p.m., the consequences were delivered. "Miss Martinez," David announced, "your suspension will include 40 hours of intensive bias training. Reinstatement will be contingent upon successful completion and certification. Captain Miller, You will report to my office Monday to begin personally overseeing the rollout of the new training protocol. Mr. Gary, Miss Carter, the same requirements apply to you." Officer Rodriguez stepped forward. "Mr. Vance, if I may," he said respectfully. "Your mother was a model of professionalism and dignity throughout this entire situation. She never once raised her voice, never became combative. She handled this with more grace than I have seen in 20 years of security work." "Thank you, Officer Rodriguez," David replied, pride and love for his mother carrying through the phone's speaker, reminding everyone that beneath the titan of industry was a son who had just watched his mother be publicly humiliated. "That's my mother." Finally, Eleanor Vance stood up from seat 1A. At 72, she moved with the quiet, unshakable authority of someone who had spent decades navigating hostile boardrooms and conquering corporate empires while never once compromising her integrity. She turned and addressed the entire cabin. "I want you all to understand something important. This is not about revenge or punishment. This is about ensuring that what happened to me today never, ever happens to anyone else." She opened the sealed envelope and withdrew a single, elegantly printed document. Board Resolution 2024-127 hereby establishes the Eleanor Vance Protocol for Bias Prevention in Customer Service. It includes AI-powered monitoring systems to flag potential bias in real time, anonymous reporting channels for employees and passengers, and a zero-tolerance policy with immediate and transparent consequences. Patricia Carter was typing furiously, her expression a mixture of terror and awe, realizing that the public relations nightmare of a lifetime was transforming, in real time, into a revolutionary opportunity for the brand. "But most importantly," Eleanor continued, her voice resonating with moral authority, "this protocol ensures that every single passenger, regardless of their race, their appearance, or who their son might be, receives the exact same standard of treatment, because dignity is not a privilege, it is a fundamental human right." Her words hung in the air. The plane was silent, save for the quiet hum of the engines, ready for a journey that was now about something far more important than just crossing an ocean. 6 months later, at the Majestic Air headquarters in Dallas, the conference room buzzed with a quiet, focused energy. Eleanor Vance sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, reviewing the first quarterly report on the implementation of the Eleanor Vance Protocol. The transformation was not just cultural, it was measurable. "Discrimination complaints are down 67% across the fleet," reported the new chief operating officer, a sharp woman who had replaced the demoted Patricia Carter. "Customer satisfaction among minority passengers has increased by 31%. The AI monitoring system has already flagged and corrected over 1,200 potential bias incidents before they could escalate." David Vance smiled at his mother from across the table. The quarterly board meeting had become their favorite collaboration. "And the stock price?" Eleanor asked, ever the pragmatic businesswoman. "Up 18% since the protocol's implementation," replied the CFO. "It turns out investors appreciate transparency and proactive corporate reform. Delta, United, and Southwest have all inquired about licensing our technology. We're looking at a new $50 million annual revenue stream." Eleanor nodded, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. "Accountability," she said, "creates profitability. It always has." Jessica Martinez sat in a classroom at the American Airlines Training Academy in Phoenix, completing the final module of her bias recognition certification. The 40 hours of intensive, often uncomfortable education had fundamentally rewired her understanding of unconscious prejudice. Her instructor reviewed her final case study analysis. "Excellent work, Jessica," she said. "You've shown a remarkable ability to identify microaggressions in complex customer service scenarios. You have come a very long way." Jessica looked up from her workbook. "Dr. Gonzalez, can I ask you something? How do I make sure I never ever treat another human being the way I treated Mrs. Vance? What do you think you learned from that experience? The instructor asked gently. That dignity isn't something you earn by looking a certain way or having a certain amount of money, Jessica said, her voice thick with emotion. It's automatic. Every single person who steps on that plane deserves respect, regardless of what I think I know about them. She paused. I judged Mrs. Vance based on her race, and I was completely horribly wrong. But even if she hadn't been the CEO's mother, I would have been just as wrong. Dr. Gonzalez smiled. That, Miss Martinez, is exactly the insight we are looking for. Congratulations. You're ready for reinstatement. Captain Mike Stevens stood before a packed auditorium of 200 majestic air pilots at their quarterly safety and cultural competency meeting. His story, once a source of deep personal shame, had become a mandatory part of the training curriculum. 6 months ago, he began, his voice steady and clear, I nearly destroyed my 25-year career because I let my own ingrained bias override documented evidence. He didn't shy away from the details. I looked at Eleanor Vance, and I made assumptions based on the color of her skin. In doing so, I violated federal law, company policy, and my own moral code. The room was silent. Every pilot in that room knew the story, but hearing it from him, stripped of all ego and excuse, was profoundly powerful. But here is what I learned, Stevens continued. Mrs. Vance could have destroyed me. She had every right to. Instead, she chose to educate me. She took my absolute worst moment as a professional and turned it into a teaching opportunity that is now changing our entire industry. He clicked to the next slide, which showed the dramatic improvement in discrimination complaint statistics. The Eleanor Vance Protocol isn't just a set of rules, he told them. It's a promise that every passenger gets the same treatment, whether they're in seat 32B or 1A. It's a promise that we will see the person, not the prejudice. The ripple effect was staggering. At Harvard Business School, Professor Janet Carter presented the Flight 788 case study to her Executive Leadership MBA program. What makes Eleanor Vance's approach so remarkable isn't that she had power, she explained. It's how she chose to use it. She could have demanded immediate firings, a massive financial settlement, and the public humiliation of the entire crew. A student raised his hand. Professor, wouldn't punishment have been more satisfying? Satisfying for whom? Professor Carter countered. Eleanor Vance wasn't interested in personal satisfaction. She was interested in systemic change. Punishment affects individuals. Education affects systems. She clicked to the final slide, showing the data. The Eleanor Vance Protocol is estimated to have already prevented over 12,000 potential discrimination incidents across the airline industry. How many incidents would a simple punishment have prevented? The answer was obvious. 0. 1 year after that fateful flight, Eleanor Vance stood at the podium of the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, accepting the Corporate Leadership Award for Systemic Change. At 73, she had become the unlikely, elegant face of dignified resistance. This award does not belong to me, she said, her calm, powerful voice filling the hallowed space. It belongs to every person who has ever chosen education over elimination, grace over grievance, and progress over punishment. In the front row, David beamed with pride. Behind him, a newly promoted Crystal sat with her supervisor's badge, now leading bias prevention training for Majestic Air's entire West Coast operation. Captain Stevens, now the Chief Safety and Ethics Officer for the airline, watched from the wings, his own transformation a living testament to her philosophy. Flight 788 taught us that real power isn't the ability to destroy your enemies, Eleanor continued, her eyes sweeping across the audience. Real power is the ability to transform them into allies. The legacy of that single, ugly incident had gone global. The original live stream had been viewed over 50 million times. In London, Heathrow Airport implemented mandatory Washington Protocol training. In Tokyo, Japan Airlines restructured their customer service policies based on the framework. The question, "What would Eleanor Washington do?" had become a new gold standard for handling bias complaints in customer-facing industries around the world. And what about you? Have you witnessed discrimination in your travels, in your workplace, in your community? Have you ever been treated unfairly simply because of who you are or how you look? Eleanor Vance's story proves that one person's dignified, courageous response can change entire systems. You don't need to be a CEO's mother to demand respect. You don't need powerful connections to create change. You just need the courage to stand in your truth. Share your story in the comments below. Every voice matters in the fight to build a world where dignity is never negotiable. Hit that subscribe button for Blacktail Stories, where we celebrate the quiet courage that changes the world, one incredible story at a time. And always remember Eleanor Vance's words. Sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to let hatred make you hateful. The flight continues. The destination is dignity for all.